Welcome to Kids Matter. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin. As a pediatrician, mom, and grandma, I understand how challenging it can be to help our kids grow into their best selves. We are so much more powerful together. Here, I will be sharing the knowledge and wisdom of a wide range of people who understand and care deeply about children. I'm hoping for your input as well, because kids really do matter. They are our future. Welcome back. I am super honored and excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Robyn Koslowitz. Hi.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to start with your bio and say a few words, and we're going to go into your topic, which is so important. Dr. Robyn Koslowitz is a clinical child psychologist, trauma treatment expert, TEDx speaker, and author of the Posttraumatic Parenting, Break the Cycle, Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be, which I read, which is awesome. And the TED Talk, I'm going to make sure we link to the show. I don't know how you encapsulated into 17 to 18 minutes, everything important, but you did, and it really was awesome.
Thank you.
Amazing. So you help parents break free from inherited patterns and become the parents their children and their inner child need. This is, to me, so critically important. I feel like a broken record. I've been saying on pretty much every episode, parents, put your emotional oxygen mask on first. And that can be easier said than done for the typical parent. And it's a whole other issue for what we call the post-traumatic parent. But before we get to post-traumatic parenting, I want to start with, please, just telling us about trauma. And welcome to the show. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I know it took us such a long time to schedule this, but I kept like, yes, this has to happen. We're going to make this happen. So, and it did. Yay. So First of all, trauma to me is any experience too big for our brain to metabolize. Sometimes people confuse trauma with stress. We are actually incredibly anti-fragile creatures. Humans are capable of handling a tremendous amount of stress. Stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. We pay money to be stressed out. If you go to a horror movie or you go to an amusement park, you're paying money to feel the pleasurable parts of stress. It's not a bad thing in and of itself. But when stress persists too much, too long, or when you're alone with coping with that stress and you don't have anyone to help you make sense of a stress, we can then tip over into what we call trauma. And the most important thing to remember about that, because I feel like nowadays you get a lot of pushback about trauma where people say, well, I went through difficult things and I'm not traumatized. First of all, sometimes doubtful. Sometimes I'll have someone say that to me and it's very clear that there's some sequelae of their trauma that they're living. But, the most, I think, egregious one was someone who had every one of her adult children estranged from her and had been divorced 3 times. And she said, I went through really hard things in my childhood and it didn't affect me at all. And I just remember thinking but maybe it did, right? There's been a lot of experiences in your life where maybe you didn't handle stress well. Again, I don't know anything about your life except for these 2 facts that you told me, but I wonder, right? So when I say that someone experienced trauma, that's really more of a scientific psychological term. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that your psyche is somehow toxic or poisoned or you don't know how to think about things or how to look on the bright side. It simply means you went through a certain amount of stress that was more than your brain could tolerate, and then later on your brain couldn't metabolize it. Boom, you're traumatized. That's all that means. Right? It doesn't mean anything more than that. It doesn't say anything about your character or your morals or your value as a person. It just says you went through this and you hit a certain invisible threshold and now it tipped into something else. Well, that's what trauma is. That's all, right? It's no more and no less than that. It's just an experience too big for your brain to metabolize that then didn't get metabolized later. It didn't get processed properly later. Which is why, by the way, that going through a terrible, stressful experience does not automatically make you traumatized. If you go through a terrible, stressful experience and someone helps you make sense of it and supports you through it and helps you understand your adrenal response and your body flooding you with cortisol and adrenaline, which are the hormones that manage our stress response, and someone helps you make sense of the story and think it through and helps you understand why your brain is giving you flashbacks now and all that stuff, you may not become traumatized. You may be stressed out, but you may not be traumatized. So that's all trauma is. It's a very predictable response. It's a cluster of symptoms that we say, oh, that's called trauma. I think we give it this moral weight that it doesn't really need, right? It's just you hit a certain threshold and that's all.
That makes so much sense. And you hear people saying trauma, it's overused. They talk about big T trauma and little t trauma. And I think there's some mockery of the overuse of the word trauma, but I think we underestimate it.
Yeah.
That's what I think we're really doing.
Yeah, and I think that, I actually don't believe in big T versus little t trauma because I don't believe I don't think the content of the trauma story matters nearly as much as who it happened to, where it landed, and who was there to support them afterwards. I look at my own story, right? Where this is a trigger warning. This was, my own story is sometimes disturbing to hear, but I had a very chronically ill parent my whole life. My father, he developed his heart condition when I think I was like 5 or 6. And he, was really ill. Like, we would have ambulances at our house. He had multiple, cardiac events that we had to deal with. I spent a lot of time in hospital waiting rooms as a child until when I was 16, he had his fatal heart attack, and I actually attempted to do CPR on him and I failed. Now, everybody would call that big T trauma, right? Like trying to do CPR on your dad, that grabs your attention, right? It's ripped from the headlines, like, whoa. Honestly, in some ways, what left a bigger impact on my psyche was the years and years and years of him being sick and how hypervigilant and anxious I became during that time and how much I learned how to sort of people please and make sure everything was calm in my home or keep myself very quiet by reading books because I wanted my house to be calm because when things were calm, my father was calm. I equated lack of calm with danger, right? When I was older, after my father died, a lot of my friends didn't know how to treat me because, they didn't even know if they could say the word father in front of me. And when teenage girls don't know how to treat you, they just don't talk to you. And that was painful and that was hard. And in some ways that left more of an impact on my psyche. Like the death of my father was terrible. The trauma of doing CPR, I had to undergo trauma therapy for it. But there were other things that left more complex and longer lasting sequelae. And I've had that with so many patients will tell me a story, right? My mom died of cancer, but then my stepmom moved in and she was super critical and every move I made was wrong. And it sounds crazy, but the fact of my stepmom is what traumatized me. Losing my mom was just sad. And anybody who's not a post-traumatic parent won't get that. Right?
No, I see that. And it also brings up the topic of ACEs, of these adverse childhood events. Like you're bringing up several of them. And I think you also were bullied, if I am correct.
Yes, I was bullied. And that definitely left its mark, right? So prior to me being in high school when I sort of got out of my shell, I was that very shy, quiet kid who sat in the corner with a book because I couldn't let myself get stressed out. And reading a book kept me calm. So in first, second, third grade, that's okay because you're basically toddlers and no one cares what you do. But by the time you get to fourth, fifth grade, especially middle school, that's weird, right? And the social world is very feminine and very, the way girls bully each other is very relational. And I didn't know how to deal with it because I was an only girl in my family. And I didn't want to stress my mother out too much by going to her for help, which is ironic because she was a school guidance counselor and she probably could have helped me. But there was a lot of, I'm just going to figure this out. There must be something wrong with me. By the time I came to high school, I was much more calm and I sort of found the ocean I needed to swim in and I found my groove and I found my friends. So when I lost some of my friends in high school after my father died, it was like another blow to me, right? Because it was I thought I got the social world thing. What happened? And it really wasn't their fault. They were actually trying to be nice. You know what I mean? They were trying to not step on my toes by avoiding uncomfortable topics, but that just makes a friendship very uncomfortable. Right? And that's where in the book I talk about this idea of ACEs and SACEs, secret ACEs, because I think when we talk about big T trauma, we talk about the ACESs from the famous Kaiser Permanente study, which is if you have had certain experiences in your life, having a parent incarcerated, moving frequently, having a parent die, living in a neighborhood that's, subject to a lot of violence, living below a certain poverty level, right? There's a specific factors that's highly correlated with certain adverse experiences in adulthood, cardiac events, getting sick, all sorts of autoimmune diseases. And it's just wow, the more these things happen to you, the more likely you are to get these conditions. That's really all that study said. It wasn't anything more. People assign magical powers to that study. It was a correlational study. The more of these events you experience, the more of these diseases you tend to have. Whoa, interesting. And you sort of can see the map of kid was sexually abused, autoimmune diseases in adulthood, like, and you're like, wow, you can't deny the connection. Correlation's not causation, but a lot of correlation tells us something. We're like, oh, this keeps happening, right? So that is nice. Those are the ACESs. It's great to have them. But what about secret ACESs? And that's, I think, where we get to the big T versus little t trauma. What are the things that happened to you that didn't make its way onto that Kaiser Permanente list, but also leave an indelible mark? Like someone who was not raised in poverty, but the home was extremely critical, right? Someone who was not raised in, not raised with a parent who's frequently incarcerated, but they were constantly bullied by their peers their entire life. Like, that's going to leave a mark, but it's not on that study.
So I'm sorry, when you say secret, do you mean ones that are not included on the normal list or ones that you don't know about? When you said secret, I thought you meant ones you don't know about. Because that could also be a thing.
Right. I think, first of all, they're not normalized on that list. So you don't look at yourself and say, oh, yeah, well, my dad was incarcerated most of my life. Of course, look, the study says, of course I'm going to have all these problems. These are the things that are sometimes kept secret also from you. Like, no, we're a very happy family. We're a very normal family. Everything's great here. Except mom's a functional alcoholic, so everything's not great here, right? In a family like that. Or there's sibling abuse, right? One sibling is really not just teasing a younger sibling, but like harming them, whether we're talking about incest or whether we're talking about something more insidious like bullying or like really making them second guess themselves, constantly targeting one child in the family. Where, no, what do you mean? We're a normal family. We're a regular family. We're a fine family. But that's not my experience of this family, right? This isn't what my life was like. I had someone who was in one of my post-traumatic parenting classes who said that her stepmother, who really was insidiously bullying her, like she would talk about the passive aggressive comments her stepmother made, and like they were like very clearly out to harm her. And she even had receipts, like meaning WhatsApp chat messages and things. And it was very clear that this is a heads you lose, tails I win dynamic, where no matter what she does, she's wrong. And this stepmom was somebody who was looked up to for being such a wonderful stepmother that she was like giving stepmothering classes, right? So can you imagine being the stepdaughter of this woman and going to your teacher and saying, my stepmom says these really hurtful things to me. What's the teacher going to say? Right? The teacher's going to be like, oh, well, your stepmom didn't mean it that way. You're misunderstanding her. She's wonderful. I mean, she gives stepmothering classes. So it's secret because you might doubt the reality of your own experience. And it's secret because the world doesn't know about it, right? So you might even gaslight yourself, right?
That's what I meant by gaslighting. You're gaslighting yourself because you're being told it's normal and everyone's telling you it's normal. Like you have a parent, for example, who's very prominent in your community, but things are happening behind the scenes.
Right.
So...
And it's hard sometimes to listen to kids, right? Sometimes when kids say something that just flies in the face of, what we expect to hear, it's hard to hear them and say, wait, maybe something is going on that I don't know about, right? And this is just like the job of a child psychotherapist in general. But I think secret ACESs are important because just because your ACES didn't make its way onto Kaiser Permanente's list doesn't mean it didn't leave the same lasting harm.
And it's also very individualized.
Right. It's not the content of what happens. It's how it lands.
It's what it means to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we're going to get to post-traumatic parenting. And I'm going to ask you to, I don't know if you trademarked this term. I never heard it anywhere else.
I did trademark the term. But
good for you.
But yeah, post-traumatic, I mean, I copyrighted it, I guess, which is, same idea.
Same thing.
But post-traumatic parenting is simply what happens when you're parenting with a trauma history. And I think that parenting is sort of the perfect storm for any adaptation we made to trauma to suddenly fall apart. Because another thing I didn't say about trauma is that when we experience trauma, our brain creates what I call a trauma app, which is a way of handling overwhelming psychological experience. And it tends to work, and it works really well. So let's say someone like me who was bullied, you might become a people pleaser because don't bully me. If I'm really people pleasing and I'm really nice and I'm really kind and I'm always volunteering and helping out and stepping in, to smooth over troubled waters, then nobody's going to want to bully me, right? And for like a fourth grader's logic, that's really smart, right? And often works, right? It's sort of like the stereotype of like, a kid who, the funny fat person, right? If I poke fun at myself, then nobody will poke fun at me. And after a while, that becomes a talent, right? Jay Leno said, like, he attributes his entire career to being I think it was like a fat Italian kid in a different ethnic group's neighborhood, right? So then he learned to be really funny because you don't punch as hard when they're laughing. Like he has a whole comedy routine about that. It worked. It created a superpower in him, but it's a trauma adaptation, right? It's a superpower. For me, I learned I'm really good at dissociating. Like I can block everything out to like a really strong extent, and I can focus on my work. That adaptation worked very well for me in graduate school, right? Like that's a great adaptation to have. I can concentrate anywhere, right? And what happens when you try to parent, right? Because what happens is you learn this, and then you start thinking that this is your only way of dealing with stress. So if you're somebody who, let's say, I'm never going to get bullied again, so I'm going to lash out. Anytime I perceive any sort of disrespect, I like go in there and I lash out first. That works great until you're parenting toddlers or teenagers, right? Like that might work great if you're a lawyer, and might work great, like, if you're the boss and in the corporate America, depending on, how well you handle it and how socially you are about like using that aggressive impulse. Doesn't work with parenting. And there's so many trauma adaptations we have, and they fall apart when we parent. And that makes so much sense because parenting is the one time that those coping tools don't work, right? I can't parent with presence and dissociate. It's not possible.
Right. I want you to tell that story because that really resonated with me when you talked about what your son said to you. So I want you to really go into that a little bit about the dissociating.
It's so interesting because that story that I'm about to tell, some people totally relate to it, and some people are like, I don't get what happened. So one of my sons, when he was 10 years old, he asked me where I go when I go away behind my eyes. At the time, he was like telling me something, and I really was away behind my eyes. I was completely pretending to be there and present and listen to him, but most of my brain was somewhere else because I was feeling a lot of stress. And then he started to cry. And he said, I don't like when you do that, when you go away behind your eyes like that, because it's really scary. And there was a part of me that really wanted to gaslight him and just say like, no, I'm right here. What do you mean? I'm just something crossed my mind. I spaced out for a second, but I knew exactly what he was talking
You're just
about.
distracted.
I was distracted.
It's not the same thing
right.
as being distracted.
I was just counting how many tablespoons I was putting into the recipe, right? Or something like that. But I wasn't distracted. I was dissociated. And he was pointing to something very real. And at that time, I thought that I had really dealt with my trauma because I had done a lot of trauma therapy, specifically for my flashbacks and my panic attacks. Like I had done a lot of, very good evidence-based work on managing my panic attacks, managing my flashbacks, because when I had been pregnant with my oldest child, I knew that was going to be a problem, right? I was like, how do I explain? Because when I have a panic attack, like I'm not functional. Like, how do I explain that to a toddler? That must be really scary. I remember even being pregnant and going to the stacks at Bope's library and looking for research on what is this going to do to the developing fetus? Like they're swimming in a soup of stress hormones. That can't be good, right? And there was no research. Like there was nothing. Partially because I was looking in the wrong places, but there just wasn't research on what a panic attack during pregnancy does to the developing baby. So that was just, I knew that was something I needed to get a handle on. So I did do really good therapy on my panic attacks, and I learned how to manage them with deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation and like all the ways we teach people to manage panic attacks. I learned how to really manage my flashbacks and intrusive thoughts so that they rarely attacked me anymore. But dissociation was one of my go-to strategies.
Why?
Because it works. Dissociation completely takes you out of your body and you actually become extremely calm. So all those stress hormones that are building up go away. I actually have a really interesting episode of my Posttraumatic Parenting podcast with Dr. Frank Putnam, who's like a psychiatrist, like a leading researcher on dissociation like in the world. And we were talking about how you just feel calm. So it's like an off button, which is great, except my kids could see it, right? Which meant that it wasn't great.
Right. What made you do it at that moment in time? What triggered it?
I think my son was asking me to solve a problem that wasn't in my power to solve, which was very triggering for me because as a kid, I felt like it was my job to keep my father alive. I felt like I was alone with a problem that was too big for me. So, and no one necessarily gave that to me. I was just a very conscientious person. And like, why did I know CPR when I was 16? Because like, you got to know CPR because what if someone drops dead in front of you, right? Like that was always my thinking, it was always the way my brain worked. So I really felt like responsible for things that were too big for me. And because I was a very good conscientious kid, I sometimes was given certain emotional jobs in the family that were too big for me.
That the parentified child.
Right. I wasn't necessarily parentified because I had no younger siblings to care for, but in other
Oh, I see. I
ways.
see what you mean. Adultified. Adultified would
Yeah,
be
I was
better. Yeah.
adultified. Like I
Right.
remember, and my mother was one of the most amazing mothers. She was a guidance counselor. She was warm and present and kind, but very, very anxious. But I remember her saying to me, like, I can't argue with Tati about taking his medication anymore, and I have to leave for work. So just make sure before you leave that Tati took his medication. My mother was an incredible person. She did not mean to give me anything that first of all wasn't given to her because she remembered, she told me stories about her father had a heart condition and how she would help her mother with like very primitive forms of like I guess like asthma treatments, and because my mother also has asthma, but like making like tents so that you can breathe in steam and things. Like she would help her mother do that for her father. So this is like not necessarily a pattern that she would realize would be harmful in any way. And also, I was an only girl, and my father loved me very much. And I was able to like be like, "Come on, Tati, before I go to school, could you And my father would do it for me. Like it was effective, and my mother was trying to keep a very ill man alive. So there was that
Also
aspect.
on your shoulders, though, when you were just a kid,
Right,
right?
right.
So I want to move on to you describe, I think, 5 subtypes of the post-traumatic parent because I want people to really understand what it means to be a post-traumatic parent, how it affects your parenting when you are post-trauma.
So I just want to explain that the five subtypes, they're research based in the sense that it is my personal research amongst the post-traumatic parenting community. It's not like peer-reviewed double-blind studies
Right.
where we can be
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is a diagnosis, right?
Right.
It's just something that I noticed over the years giving post-traumatic parenting classes. People would tend to sort themselves into groups. I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. Sarah asked the same question as Danielle, and they come from a similar background. And that's sort of how I created those categories. But it's not like a diagnosis. I think we sometimes, on social media especially, we sometimes like give weight to things that don't actually exist as diagnoses, right? So, but the subtypes are the number one is the entangled post-traumatic parent. That's somebody who is so enmeshed in like her family of origin or in a toxic ex relationship or maybe even in like a golden handcuffs job that they can't actually parent the kids in front of them because they're held back, right? They're entangled in another relationship. So that's one subtype. And then we have the disengaged post traumatic parent. That's somebody who's so terrified that their harm will harm their child that they dissociate. They take a step back. They might outsource their parenting a lot. So they might give it over to a spouse. They might give it over, they might hire people, right? A homework tutor, a personal shopper, a pastor, a rabbi, right? Someone else. Like, this person will give my kid the sex talk. This person will go shopping with my kid for camp. This person will do homework with my kid. My husband will do this, right? Like everybody else is getting a job because I'm going to harm the kid. I'm going to do it wrong.
I will say, though, okay, I just want to interject for a minute that outsourcing something that you don't feel capable of doing might be actually a really positive thing.
Yeah, every adaptation is sometimes positive,
Right.
right? And in fact, I'll sometimes give people the advice to outsource. Like,
Right.
you and your son get into a lot of like little altercations over everything. Why not hire a homework teacher and then like and someone who he likes to work with, and then the homework teacher's got to keep him motivated and everything while you focus on something else. We sometimes do that. Every single one of these, right? Entanglement, there's something to be said for like I feel close to my family of origin. I want to support them. I want my children to have grandparents. I This job may take a lot out of me, but it provides our lifestyle, right? All of these are something that can sometimes be good, but then it takes over and it becomes the
It's a matter of
default and the
balance.
go-to. It's a matter
Right.
of balance. It's also a matter of fear. Are you
Hmm.
outsourcing this because I am not the best person to do this, but I am the best person to do something else? Or are you outsourcing this because I'm not the best person to do anything with my child?
Oh,
Right?
well,
That's where I worry. Like
I
when I
see.
had a mom say to me, I want you to give the sex talk to my kid because I was molested and I am going to say it wrong. Like my emotions are going to get there. And I said, I think we were better off working with you until you are comfortable having this conversation with your kid. She said to me, yeah, but my kid's going to camp now, and I'm not going to be able to have this conversation in a way that will be healthy. So can you temporarily do this? And I said, I actually consulted with some like supervisors of mine, and like I said, yeah, we can do that. And we did that. Then she and I worked heavily on her experiences so that when her kid came home from camp, she was able to sort of, because the sex talk is not a one and done thing, right? It's a process, and we should be doing it a lot with our kids every so often. So by then she was comfortable being able to have this conversation with her kid.
I love that because it makes me think about the intertwining of anxiety and avoidance. And the more you're anxious about something you avoided, and then it builds the anxiety. So if your message is, I can never do this, that's very different from, at this moment in time, it needs to be done and it cannot be me.
Right. When you work with children, which is what I primarily do in therapy, and parents, you got to be a pragmatist, because ideally I should not be the one giving your kid the sex talk. Absolutely, you, mom, should be the one. In reality, kids going to camp in 4 weeks, someone's got to have that conversation, right? A mental health professional is probably better than, your great aunt, right? You've got to, like, at that point, we got to have someone do this, because you can't go to camp without having had that conversation with a figure that your parent trusts. And, so that made sense in that moment. Then, but yeah, right, you got to do the thing you're afraid of, because otherwise it will just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's, the basis of treating any anxiety-based anything, right? So that's the disengaged parent. Then we have the perfectionist parent. Perfectionist parent is trying so hard to do parenting perfectly that they forget to be present. Like, they're the people who are buying all the parenting scripts and all the parenting courses and are constantly policing themselves. And I find that very often perfectionist parents marry each other. So they're policing each other, which is great because we should parent well. And, if your mom's default strategy for anything you did wrong was whacking you across the face, and you're tempted to whack your kid across the face every time you feel stress, it is good to try to do better, right? That's wonderful. And you can't be perfect. You're not going to be able to be perfect. You're going to burn out.
Perfect.
No one's
and
perfect.
This is the one that breaks my heart the most, because I see it as a pediatrician the most, which is why I'm nodding furiously to you're talking about that subtype. I see a lot of parents who did have traumatic childhoods and are determined that their child's childhood will not be like theirs. And they do go into this whole perfect parenting. I call it a trap, because social media is constantly making it sound like this is the way to be the perfect parent. It's impossible. And it just interacts with their anxiety that goes overboard. So that could be a whole separate podcast. In fact, you did one recently, which I loved, with Stephanie Chu.
Stephanie
Fu.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. But yeah, and the idea, I think, is that your kid is not you. Your kid has you, and your kid has you for support. So when someone comes to me and says, today I yelled at my daughter and it's exactly like when my father used to hit me. Well, no, it's not. Words are arguably less harmful than physical violence. Is yelling good? I'd rather you not yell, but this is not exactly the same thing. You are several levels more competent of a parent than your father sounds like, right? And okay, so you yelled, and now she's going to feel abandoned and alone, and she's going to feel like, and I say, what's the worst thing that will happen? She's going to feel like her mother hates her and doesn't even love her, because why would you yell at someone you love? She may feel that way, but she may also understand that mommy is human, and sometimes humans lose their temper. And you always have the possibility of repair, right? You can go to her and you can say, today things got a little loud. Let's talk about it. I shouldn't have yelled, right? And whatever else was going wrong, I shouldn't have yelled. Would have been a better way to handle this situation. And then tomorrow you can have a separate conversation about whatever the problem was that led you to yell. Meaning, you don't want to have that conversation when you're doing a repair, especially if you're a perfectionist parent. You don't want to make your child responsible for your emotions, because you don't want to people please your child where they're going to forgive you. So it's not like, well, I wouldn't have yelled if you would have put on your shoes, right? Tomorrow it's a separate conversation about, it seems like every Wednesday when we're running out to like gymnastics, there's always this rush to find your shoes, and there's always a fight with your sister. How do we, now that we know this pattern, what do we do about it? How do we make sure that Wednesdays go smoothly from now on? I don't want to yell. You don't want to be yelled at. You don't want to be late to gymnastics practice, soccer practice, whatever. I don't want you to be late. How do we make this work? Right? It's a separate conversation.
One of many, I'm sure.
Of course.
I'm jumping up and down for repair because I love this idea of repair and I want to get to it. But first, I want to start from the beginning of this idea of you describe the trauma app. I like that metaphor on many levels, but especially the idea that it's software and you can change software, right?
Yeah.
It's not hardware, it's not fixable. And so,
Software is
yes,
programmable, right? And it's a program. I have my dissociation program likes to run and it frequently wants to run. And there are times, and that's when it's like called a flashback, right? Where I can't stop it from running. But usually I can be like, oh, trauma app, you're activating. I am going to mindfully deselect your permission, and sometimes there's like really silly things we can do. Like I'm going to sing everything let's say a mom doesn't want to yell. I'm going to sing everything I say for the next half hour. It's very hard to yell and sing at the same time unless you're like an opera singer. It's like really difficult to. I had a mom tell me that. She's like, I can yell and sing, and I'm like, and I'm like, wow, I can't. How can you? She's like, well, I'm a classically trained singer. I'm like, okay,
wow.
most humans cannot.
Do not have that superpower.
Right, right. But the idea is there are ways of interrupting that programming. There's a ways of noticing, oh, this app is turning on and I'm going to turn it off. I personally find it a more helpful metaphor than the idea of the body keeping the score, right? Because if it's your body, you can't control your body. There's so many things, right? Puke happens, right? There's so many things about your body that you cannot control. And I feel like we all know that about our bodies. Like sometimes I faint or, right? Like, or whatever it is, when I'm starving, I need to eat. Like I can control my body fully. So when you think of the body keeping the score, it feels like, okay, so my body is taking over now. When you think of it as software, right? I like Lisa Feldman Barrett has a much better metaphor, which is the body is the scorecard, right?
Like that.
Right, because like if I'm anytime I'm in a medical situation, I'm going to start feeling this dissociative calm that allows me to actually handle emergencies really well. That's my scorecard. That's my body having an adaptation to a particular situation, right? That adaptation wasn't good for me, but it is an adaptation to a particular situation. My brain would like to run this program right now. And I can tell my brain, no, don't run this program. I just don't find my body fundamentally controllable. I find our bodies are mysterious. Like we can't always control them. Ask any teenage girl, you can't control your body, right? Sometimes you just start to cry, right? All
Right.
sorts of things happen to your body.
But in terms of control, you can't necessarily control your brain or your trauma app. I don't want to get all perfectionistic
Right.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, you can't necessarily control it, but you can work on reprogramming it. You
Right.
can gain a lot more a bigger measure of agency. I guess I feel hopeless at the thought of controlling my body, like at a fundamental level. Like if I was trying to control my body from having a panic attack, that would be terrible. Because that would never work. And in fact, it would reinforce my panic attack. If I would say, oh, trauma app, you're turning on the panic attack mode right now. Okay, this is going to be uncomfortable for a couple of minutes. I'm going to have to breathe for a little bit. Maybe I should pull over to the side of the road, depending on like what I'm doing, and it will pass. Right? If I was trying to control my body, heart stop beating. I can't do that.
I really want to get more into breaking the cycle because you talked a little bit about deselecting the trauma app, but you have this great framework. It's called AIM, Acceptance, Integration, and Meaning Making. And I would love for you to go into that, please.
So a lot of post-traumatic parents, oh, by the way, we didn't say the last two subtypes, which is paralyzed and
Oh,
survivor, right?
oh,
Paralyzed is
mm.
just a post-traumatic parent who doesn't trust their own judgment. So they're always second guessing themselves and they start one thing and then they start something else and the next parenting influencer says something so they try that and they're just running around all the time. Paralysis paradoxically looks frantically busy. And then we have survival mode, and that's just like right after you were traumatized and you're still reeling and you haven't yet settled into a subtype. So those are our types that I see over and over and over again. In terms of the AIM model, here's why I came up with it. A lot of post-traumatic parents cannot access therapy. Like someone will read the beginning of my book, right? Because the whole beginning of my book is the impact of trauma on parenting. And they'll read the beginning and they'll be like, you know what, you're right. I'm totally a post-traumatic parent. I cannot access therapy. I can't afford it. There's no therapist I trust around me. It's not a good time in my life. Whatever. I'm in therapy for something else that's more primary than the trauma for all sorts of reasons. So what I try to do is, having been trained in so many trauma treatment modalities, I try to boil them down to like their essential ingredients. Every trauma treatment that works essentially has these three components. It has an acceptance phase, it has an integration phase, and we'll get into that, and it has a meaning making phase. And I defy anyone to find me a trauma model that works that doesn't have those three. Sometimes Some of them start with integration before acceptance. Some of them start with meaning making before the other two, but they all have these. But most trauma treatment models, first it's acceptance. We undo counterfactual thinking. We stop wishing life had been different. We start noticing our flashbacks for what they are, which is it's our brain trying to reshape history, which has to do with where trauma is encoded in our brain. The part of our brain that encodes trauma doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. So if you have a flashback, let's say you were in a car accident, you have a flashback to the moment before impact. That part of your brain is trying to say, you dummy, turn left instead of turning right, and then the truck won't hit you. Because that part of your brain doesn't understand that you can't say, oh, good idea. Let me press the rewind button and let me go to the moment before impact. Let me turn left instead of right. And yay, the accident never happened, right? We can't do that. So that's what your brain is trying to accomplish, right? That's what the acceptance model is. If you think through your childhood and you think through your childhood, maybe you'll figure out a way that it was okay, some of the things that happened to you. This is what happened to you. It wasn't okay. People were doing the best they could with the tools they had. Those tools were not always adequate. This happened. We're undoing counterfactual thinking. We're accepting it. It is what it is. It happened. Then we have integration. What does this mean about me and my personality and my sense of self? How do I make sense of this knowing who I am in the world, right? How do I let this just be a thing about me, not the thing about me? Whatever the trauma was, right? It doesn't matter what it was. That could, and by the way, the trauma could be something like, I had a post-traumatic parent talk about like having learning disabilities, but being in a school where they thought what they should do with her is give her a lot of tutoring, but keep her in the general classroom. So she constantly felt incompetent. And I think her parents were trying their hardest. And I think the school was trying their hardest and they were trying to help her. But then you become a parent and you feel incompetent, right? Very hard. Parenting makes you feel incompetent all the time. I bet you're a pediatrician and I bet parenting can make you feel incompetent, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't end when they grow up, by the way.
Right. It never ends. You just feel incompetent. And so when you already have fears about your incompetence, it's going to make it even harder. So first accepting that maybe there would have been a better way to handle your learning disabilities in school, right? Like this happened to you. It shouldn't have happened. You won't do this to your own kids. Like that approach of like sort of glossing over your difficulties didn't work. Okay. Integration. This taught me some lessons about myself and the world. Like I'm super resourceful. I'm super creative. I figure out workarounds. I know how to do things, not the things that my third grade teacher wanted me to do, but I know how to do a lot of things in my own way, right? And you integrate that into your sense of self, right? The reason I am in the profession I'm in is because I figured out so many workarounds that it worked well for my artistic side of me. And that's why I'm so artistic, right? And that's integration. And then mission. You make meaning out of it, whether it's a mission of like, I'm going to change the world, right? Like to a certain extent, part of writing the book for me was my M, right? This was my mission. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to get other parents who feel as desperate and alone as I felt when I became a mom. And I said, what do I do with my PTSD? I'm going to make them feel understood. That's a big mission. And maybe it's a tiny micro mission of like, in my family, we're going to do things differently. In my family, we're going to communicate with respect. In my family, my kids are always going to feel whatever, right? I'm going to work on making sure my kids know I'm there for them. Whatever your lack was in childhood, right? You make a mission out of it. And that's health, right? When you've done the AIM, when you've really accepted it, you've integrated it into your sense of self, and you've come up with a mission. And you can't do all the things. My kid's childhood will be perfect is not a mission. My kids will always know that I am someone who is there for them when they have a problem. They can come to me. That can be a mission, right? I will have a home where on the balance, there is more laughter and joy and positive communication than there is hitting and yelling. That's a mission, right? My kids will never be yelled at. Not a mission.
This is amazing. And you said perfect. We want kids to be happy all the time. And that is such a huge mistake. And that's an entire other podcast.
Yeah.
But actually, and this is what's so amazing, and I love how you talk about how when you heal your inner child, you can also raise your child at the same time, and it's not like two separate things.
Yeah,
right?
It's not. I think a lot of post-traumatic parents, I believe in inner child as a metaphor for sort of like unhealed versions of ourselves that are sort of floating around in there. Like there's a part of me that will always wonder if I'm being socially rejected, right? Like I will be I will notice social nuance a lot. I think it's why I'm very effective when I do like anti-bullying programs in school, because I get that. I get how bullying amongst girls works, how it feels, how it looks, right? I have that nuance of it because I've experienced it. But then at the same token, that part of me, that little girl will always be there, but it doesn't have to be screaming. It doesn't have to take over. It has to just inform me, right? It has to give me some information of like, oh, this is valuable. When somebody who, I don't know, lost a parent in childhood maximizes certain family times, is very into like, let's prioritize family togetherness, we're going to have a family game night or something like that. That's because she's listening to the little girl that felt very alone and didn't have a mom. So now my kids are going to have a mom, right? And you're listening to that little girl without letting her take you over.
Right. You're taking from your pain and you're helping others not have that pain, right? That's the meaning. And that's how a post-traumatic parent can be the best parent for their child.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, say, for example, dyslexia or neurodivergence, I've heard of that. The neurodivergent parent can be the best parent for the neurodivergent child.
100%. 100%. Because you get it. And you're like, no,
Right.
when she says that she can't eat that. I just had this with a parent who has ARFID, although it wasn't understood as ARFID when she was a kid, with a kid with ARFID who's like, no, when she says she can't eat that texture, she means she will throw up the minute it hits her throat. Like, and she can't control it at that point. It doesn't mean that she needs to like man up and swallow it anyway. It's not picky eating. It's something else. She gets it because like, oh, this is what I went through. I understand it. And at the same token, then they can say, but if we play around with the texture a little bit, we might be able to stretch it to the point where she can try it. Why? Because you have that window, that insight of like, oh, wow, this feels impossible to swallow, right? I get it. And very often after that first alarm of like, oh, did I do this to my kid? Or that sense of like, oh no, I know exactly what they're going to go through. This is the worst thing ever, which is your inner child, right? Then the parent says, wait, I have competencies. I learned how to eat more foods. I bet I can help my kid learn that too. And it's like that with anything, shyness, bullying, right? Learning disabilities, anything, right? Oh, I used to get angry really easily and I learned to get a handle on it. And now my kid has that same tendency. I bet he can get a handle on it. I hate that I gendered anger as male, but whatever. Okay.
It really flips the script. The same thing that you're trying to recover from is actually your superpower. I know it sounds like toxic positivity. We don't mean that here.
Yeah, we don't mean that. We just mean that when you integrate, you're saying, oh, I actually have some unique insight onto this that I understand. I have patients with OCD who will say to me, you get the way my brain works. And I think it's because you have PTSD. I'm like, yeah, we are both psychodiverse, right? Our psyches work differently than other people's. And what I'm getting is the level of distress that it can feel to do something that OCD says not to do. That everybody else looks at you like, so just hand your kid the apple that might be contaminated with pesticides. She's asking for an apple. You washed it with fruit wash. It's fine. Just hand it to her. And that feels like a mountain to go over, right? To just hand your child that apple, right? And I get that like everyone else is looking at you like, what? Why are you shaking after you handed your kid the apple? I get why that was so scary. I can see that. I don't have OCD, so I've never experienced OCD, but I know what it feels like to be terrified of something that everybody else thinks is normal.
See, but again, this is something that could be a double-edged sword. And I'm thinking again about gentle parenting and how a lot of post-traumatic parents, I think, are very susceptible to a misunderstanding of responsive or unconditional or gentle, all these names.
Right.
The ideology behind it is something that I subscribe to, I believe you subscribe to.
Yeah, I mean, we should really what
right.
The best of gentle parenting content is really about authoritative parenting, right? It's that straightforward, what I call R2 parenting in the book, responsive and responsible, right? Where, I get that you don't want to wear shoes and like hot pavement, broken glass, right? Like, and you should be able to do both. I think there are parents, though, who are maybe people pleasers, and then they think they're gentle parenting or they're perfectionist parents. And wait, if I truly get your distress at wearing shoes outside, then it kind of makes sense that if I really get it, I'll carry you, right? You're 4, but I'll carry you because you really don't want to wear shoes. You're forgetting the other side of like, and the pavement's hot. Because like theoretically I could carry you, but like you're 4, so this is getting difficult to do. And I'm not going to be a very responsive parent if I'm carrying a 4-year-old in 80-degree weather all day long, right? There comes a point where I'm going to lose it, as I should, because that's too much. So,
but not just that, I'm sorry, but not just that, but if you're coming from the aspect of, I had the same problem, I could not tolerate my distress, and now I can't tolerate my child's distress, right? Then you're in that anxiety avoidance cycle, thinking you're
Yeah.
being a gentle parenting. This is what I see a lot as an error. It's an unfortunate error. It's an unfortunate
Yeah.
misunderstanding.
I'm gonna tell you a funny story, although I'm changing the story because kind of to protect the identity of the guilty, so to speak. I was talking with a parenting influencer, and she was like, "So you're basically saying," I was talking about her assertion that behavior charts are always abusive. And I think that a behavior chart done properly is not coercive or abusive. Like if you give your kid a sticker every time, you put a little chart on the bathroom wall, and every time your kid brushes their teeth, they get a sticker. And after a week of stickers, they get to watch an extra episode of Bluey. I don't consider that coercive. I consider that how the world works. Right? Yuck, you don't want to, but you're gonna, and then we're gonna be so proud of you because you stuck to your commitment of brushing your teeth, and we're so proud. And now you can watch this extra episode, or you can whatever, if have 10 minutes extra against bedtime, or whatever. We'll play an extra game of Lego, whatever it is. That's how the world works, right? You study hard, you get 100 on your test, you feel good about it. Like it's sort of just like life. And so she said to me, so basically, you're saying we should stress our kids out in order for them to learn how to handle stress. I'm like, no, life will stress your kids out. Your job is to help your child learn to deal with the stress. The stress will happen because, like I said, shoes, toothbrushes, healthy food, homework, other people, right? Stress will happen. I also think, and this is going to get like me being very nitpicky and very like geeky PhD-ish, but in the 80s, we had this like idea of like this very like positive discipline, right? Like the 1, 2, 3 magic, kind of like do as I say and that's it. And there was a lot of like, we're going to shape kids to be exactly as the parent wants, which is wrong. It's inaccurate.
It's authoritarian,
it's impossible.
right?
It's authoritarian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of authoritarian parenting that was being sold as authoritative, and it wasn't. One of the reasons why is Diana Baumrin, who did this research, right? She's the one who said authoritarian, authoritative, permissive. She's the one who coined all those terms. She talked about how parenting is a balance between responsiveness and demandingness. Somehow in the 80s, demandingness became this idea of power struggles. I am demanding this of you. I am demanding good grades of you. I am demanding perfect attendance of you. I am demanding perfect behavior from you. Demandingness actually means helping children navigate demands. When I tell my child it's bedtime, it's not me demanding bedtime of them. There's a clock, and it's 7 p.m., and you have to get up at this time. Your body is demanding sleep. The clock is demanding bedtime. I'm not demanding of you because I'm in charge. I'm helping you navigate the demands of the world. It would be lovely if we could like live on candy and go to sleep whenever we finally feel tired and have screen time all the time. Like all of those things, that would be so fun. And you can't live on frosting because you're going to get a tummy ache, right? Like the demands of your body are that you have to eat more nutritious food than not nutritious food because otherwise you won't feel very well, right? The demands of the clock mean you got to go to bed. The demands of other humans means you got to like keep your voice down in the library, right? Like the library is a space that demands quiet. The librarian's not demanding quiet. The space is demanding quiet, right?
You know what's an important nuance here that I just thought of now is that there's a difference between trying to control the child for the sake of control and demand things of them that maybe you shouldn't be, like say performance, getting into an Ivy League school, for example, sports, or what you're talking about, which is regular demands that you need to function in the world. Those are two different things. And so maybe there's a backlash here.
Yeah. And there was a time, right? I think perfect attendance awards, like when I look at those, we had those when I was a kid. So you just don't get strep. You come to school even when you're like raging high with fever to win that award. Like that just doesn't make any sense, right? Versus even perfect grades. Some of us are academically gifted, some of us aren't. So if I'm mom and I'm demanding perfect grades, I mean, I am a fairly good student. I have good feelings of my academic competence. I did very well on my SATs. I got a PhD. I probably am good at academics. I'm not amazing. Like, right, I'm not amazing at math. Like, I'm good at statistics because statistics is not math, it's logic. But I'm not good at trigonometry. I was not good at chemistry in high school. Like, these were just not great subjects. I did okay because I was a conscientious student, but I didn't get straight A's, right? Like, because or maybe, I guess in high school I did get straight A's because I cared deeply about getting those straight A's, but not effortlessly, right? I had to work really hard. at like doing well on certain subjects, but my parents never made me feel like to get all the A's because like how dare I get an A minus, right? If I got an A minus on chemistry, my parents would have been very proud of me because that was clearly the best mark I could get. And it's probably better mark had I not studied as hard as I would, I probably would have gotten a B, right? Like, but it wasn't like, oh no, I can't come home with a B. I came home with a B minus in trigonometry. You know what? My parents were proud of it because like for my math brain, I can only learn math as I've learned now in adulthood, one on one. I cannot learn math in a class of 30 people. So I was never going to do well in trigonometry unless I was going to like hire a tutor. But why? I was doing fine. So like no one's hiring me a tutor to go from like a 87 to a 92. Do you know what I mean? Like that's just like not wise use of resources. Okay, right? But I studied hard and I did as well as could be expected. But if my parents would have like demanded straight A's in that way from me, I would have felt like a failure with a, A minus or a B plus in trigonometry when to this day I'm pretty proud of my B in whatever mark I got in the end, like B probably of the year in trigonometry. I'm super proud of that. That was probably as much trigonometry as I ever could have learned.
But for people who've grown up with truly authoritarian parents, right? And
Right.
generations have, right? It's not surprising that they might go to the opposite end and be
Right.
unintentionally permissive.
Right. Being afraid that if you come home with a B on a subject that truly challenges you, and the B is honestly you maximizing your abilities, but dad's going to take out his belt. I can understand why having a sticker chart for brushing your teeth feels coercive because it reminds you, right? That's the trauma app turning on. I'm forcing my kid to do something he doesn't want to do. Building a healthy habit that is healthy, good for the child, that we can all understand. Your kid's going to grow up one day and say, yeah, it's good that I brushed my teeth, right? Is very different than forcing someone into a behavior pattern that they absolutely cannot get to. Like if like I there was no way I could have gotten an A in trigonometry in high school, right? That would have never happened. Forcing a kid to get that A when they can't and being terrified of you so they go beyond their capacity, yeah, that's coercive. Saying to a kid, I want you to study as hard as you can and do as best as you can, and I do expect a certain level of effort. Like you can't just blow off the class. Okay, that's authoritative. And I think that I get it. I get the trigger. I get the trauma app turning on at the thought of making a child do anything at all. But there's a far cry between helping a child navigate demands and being demanding. It's not the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think it's really important to point out that I think what people are complaining about with gentle parenting is that reaction, right? Of being afraid to make demands because that would be authoritarian, right? That would
Yeah,
be trying to control their kids, and thus the aversion to, say, sticker charts. And the
right.
popularity now, by the way, of pathological demand avoidance. Have you heard of
I was
that?
about to bring that up as an example. I
Mm.
was consulting in a school, and the parents said to the principal, and the principal was like, "Just help us understand this," because they never heard of this before. They're like, they're saying that that their child has pathological demand avoidance, and therefore we cannot demand anything of him. So, Dr. Kozlos, how do we educate this kid? Like, we can't do this. Like, the Rebbe says something and he says no. He just storms out of the classroom. He hits people when he wants. Like, what are we supposed to do? I said, I myself do not know. So I came into the room. We're having this meeting, and the principal and this kid and me, and I said to the kid, you know where the prize closet is, like where the treats closet is? And he's like, yeah. So I said, okay, so do me a favor. I really want a I didn't even say do me a favor. I said, I really want one of those like Drizzleicious snack bags that they have, and you can have one too. Go to the cabinet and get me one. And I purposely worded it as a command. So the kid went to the cabinet and got me a Drizzleicious bag and got one for himself. And I said, okay, so the kid's not pathologically demand avoidant, right? Because pathological would mean when it's harmful, right? You just drank poison. Drink this antidote right now. No, because you can't tell me what to do. That would be pathological demand avoidance, right? Because that's a bad thing for you. Like you're going to be in a lot of pain in 5 minutes if you don't drink this antidote. This kid, when the demand was good for him, wasn't demand avoidant at all. He was very happy to go to the cabinet and get me a treat and get himself a treat. So he's demand avoidant, but he's not pathologically demand avoidant. And that matters because, okay, so you're demand avoidant. How are they supposed to educate you then? Then homeschool, right? Because a school cannot, you literally pay a school to make demands on your kid, right? When the teacher says, open your math books to page 27, that's a demand.
I think more and more of these kids are being homeschooled for that reason.
Which fine, that's a choice. And
Yeah.
if that's the choice you want to make, that's fine. But you can't demand that a school is going to educate in this way because that's not how schools educate. Now, if it's pathological, then you've got to work to overcome the pathology. You've got to stretch the rubber band. Now, that does mean being very low demand. And I work with PDA kids, and we do work on navigating demandingness by removing as many demands as possible and removing as much, allowing the environment to control the child rather than the parent trying to control the child. So you set up the environment in such a way that there aren't so many difficult demands on the child. But then our entire job is, okay, right now you can tolerate demands at a level 2, let's get you to a level 3.
Right. It's not to permanently keep the level low, rock
Right.
bottom. That's the problem.
Right. It's like if you have RFID and you can only eat 2 foods and one of the foods is about to be discontinued, that's a problem, right? So we want to get you to 3 foods and then 7, right? Like, and we're gonna get you there. We're not staying stuck. I really dislike when a parent's like, well, my child has sensory needs, and then 3 years later, we still have the same sensory needs being given to the teacher. What was happening in your occupational therapy from 3rd grade till 7th grade that we're still making the same accommodations? There should be a point where now we're teaching you how to handle being in a classroom where there's a lot of noises, right? Use the technology you have available to you. Let's make your breaks further and further apart. If we're still taking a sensory break every 5 minutes in 7th grade as we did in 3rd grade, then we made no progress, right? If I see every 5 minutes in 3rd grade and every 7 minutes in 4th grade and every 10 minutes, whatever. And then by the time we're in high school, there's just 3 subjects that you're excused from. Okay, we're making progress.
This actually illustrates a problem that I see, which is that you can have therapy, but it's not always good therapy. Right? And that's true for trauma, for parents who are trying to get therapy for their trauma, which we talked about before. I find that a lot of times people confuse trauma-informed with trauma-focused therapy, and can go for years for therapy that's not really trauma-focused or addressing their trauma. And I think the same thing is true for kids who have whatever we're calling pathological demand avoidance or sensory issues or whatever. It's hard to get the right kind of therapy. You should see progress with therapy.
Yeah, you should see progress. Sometimes you don't. And also, not every therapist is the right therapist for every case, right? I've had kids come in and refuse to talk to me, and we've sat in silence or we've played stupid games, right? Like really, like when I say stupid games, I just mean like really like beerly interactive games. Like we're going to play Rat-a-tat-cat or something where like for a few sessions before they were willing to talk to me, right? And then I have kids that for a few sessions I said to the parent, I don't think this is ever going to happen. So I think we need to discontinue therapy. And I've had kids I once had a kid who I said that about. Like I said, like, I don't, like, all we're doing is like chit-chatting about fashion, and we're never getting past that. And I actually had to say that to the parents, like, we can't get to the next place. And the kid said, no, 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 don't stop therapy. I'll start talking, right? I wasn't doing that to be coercive in any way. But I was just like, look, we're doing this and doing this and doing this. I don't know that I'm the right fit for her. I didn't say to the parents we're chit-chatting about fashion because I can't actually say what's happening in therapy. I'm like, I don't think I'm the right fit. I don't think we're making any progress. I don't think that she trusts me enough. I'm probably the wrong style therapist for her. And the kid came back the next session. I said, maybe we'll have a goodbye session next time. And the kid came back and said, no, I like you. I don't know. It's stressful to come right after school. I need to decompress. And like the whole time we were talking about these things, but I really like coming here and I do want to talk to you about what I'm in therapy for. I said, great, I get it. How much decompressing time do you need? And how much talking to me time can we do? Let's negotiate it. And like we negotiated it. Like, let's do this amount of a game and this amount of chit-chatting, and then let's talk about the issue. And yeah, maybe the parent would be hoping that for all 45 of those minutes, we are talking about, I don't know, your OCD. And I wish we could do that, but actually we made better progress with 20 minutes of chit-chatting and 10 minutes of a game and 20 minutes of talking about your OCD or 15 minutes of talking about your OCD, and that worked because the alternative was doing nothing, right? That's therapy sometimes. We're not always going to be the right fit for every person, but if there's no plan to make progress, then we have to rethink. And sometimes, and I have to also say, sometimes a holding pattern is valid, depending on the situation. Sometimes we're not trying to make progress. Sometimes we're trying to keep things as they are. So I don't want to say you're always making progress in all therapies.
And things change and new stressors come, and sometimes kids need medications or new schools, or there's so many different pieces to this.
Yeah, I had a supervisor who said that she went through a very deep, deep depression at a point in her life when I think she had several losses at the same time. And she was in therapy just to stay stable and to like be able to meet her work demands and her life demands. And she wasn't trying to make quote unquote progress. She was like cautioning us about like being so focused on progress all the time. She was just trying to like, the therapy was allowing her to tread water, which was what she needed to be able to do at that time. That's also true.
Holding onto the edge of the water, trying not to
Yeah.
drown.
Yeah.
Yeah, see
Yeah.
that. I see that. I really respect your time, and I know we have to go soon. I just want to go back over just for a minute what you called R squared parenting, which I think should be R cubed. Okay? Because
Okay.
you have responsive and reliable, and I want repair in there.
Although repair, see, responsive and responsible are simply the two sides of responsiveness and demandingness, right? There's nothing, when you're being responsible, right? When you're teaching a kid a skill, even if they don't want to learn that skill, I don't want to brush my teeth, yucky, I don't care, so what? So I won't have teeth when I grow up, I don't need teeth, I don't care, right? Yeah, but as a responsible adult, I know that like you're going to need your teeth, right? And like your distress is just distress and it's okay. And you're allowed to be mad about the fact you have to brush your teeth and you got to brush your teeth, right? Nothing in that approach is stopping you from being responsive. It's like, I think people think you have to choose, right? Like you can either be this like authoritarian, we're doing sticker charts and we're punishing you and like wait till your daddy gets home kind of parenting, or we're responsive. When in fact, you can be very responsive and there's also consequences, and there's also an expectation made on kids' behavior.
Yes, but the reason I wanted to have repair there is because at any given moment, you might not be able to be so responsive.
Right. And then you'll repair. Right. Exactly. That goes
Exactly.
with responsiveness. Like, can always fix it. And, you can always, you know, I just think that there's something to be said for not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Natural and logical consequences, if they're natural and logical, are never abusive, right? It's the unnatural, illogical consequences that can easily become abusive. Like, I don't know if you remember on social media, there was that controversy where a mom made her kid walk to school with a big sign saying, I bullied someone on the bus, so now I have to walk to school. That's not a natural and logical consequence. Natural and logical consequence might be walking to school, but the sign isn't natural.
It's
When you bully
humiliating.
someone, you don't get a mark of Cain on your face, right? That's not what
Right.
happens, right? So it was and people were like, well, she did a natural and logical consequence. The logical consequence is you have to walk to school, like, right?
Right.
The school kicked you off the bus and now you have to walk to school. And if it's a reasonable distance on safe streets, fair enough. Figure out a way to get yourself to school because you can't be on the bus. That's hopefully you'll then not bully people because you'll be like, oh, being on the bus is a privilege and I want to keep that privilege. So, I'm not going to do that. The same way, like when I was a lifeguard and if kids were running by the pool, I made them sit out for part of swimming period because you can't run by the pool if you want to swim, right? And since next week you're going to want to swim, you're not going to run by the pool, which is good because as the lifeguard, I can't simultaneously, I never understood this, how we made like 16-year-old lifeguards like watch an entire pool area. What happens if one kid does slip and does cut their head? Then I'm dealing with your cut head, but not a pool full of children. Like I always felt like my attention was way too fragmented when I was a lifeguard. Like that wasn't safe. Again, I have hypervigilance when it comes to health, but the idea of next week, I remember being a lifeguard and kids coming into the pool and seeing that I was a lifeguard on duty and starting to run and then stopping themselves. Great, you learned self control. Fabulous. You're not running by the pool. That's a natural and logical consequence. You didn't want to miss half of swimming, so you didn't run. That's not mean. That's not coercive. That's just, yeah, you didn't do your homework and now your teacher is like, okay, your grade's going down. And if you care about your grade, that's a problem for you. I'm not going to write you an excuse note. You're going to learn, right? There's nothing, I can also be super responsive and be like, oh, shoot, it must have been so hard to walk to school. You really didn't want to have to walk to school. You really wish you could have ridden the bus. I hope next week when you ride the bus, you don't ever do anything that makes you lose that privilege again. Yeah, I bet your feet do hurt. Here, let me give you some Epsom salt so you can soak your feet, right? Like the one does not cancel out the other, right? Yeah, I bet that kid was in some ways annoying you, and that's why you did that bullying behavior towards him. I get it. What else could you do when someone's annoying you besides hitting them, right? Like I can be so responsive about that conversation. So responsive.
I love it. And I just want to keep parents with the idea that this is a work in progress, right? Like it
Right.
always sounds when experts talk about something like, but I can't do that, but I suck at that.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep emphasizing the concept of repair. And I want to end with a line that I saw you write somewhere. Not only will your damage not damage your kids, but your damage can be the catalyst for you to break the cycle.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, because I think so many post-traumatic parents come into parenting feeling like so polluted by their trauma, feeling like such a like their body is such a source of uncomfortable feelings that they just feel unable to parent, right? Parenting is so much about gut instinct, but if you have PTSD, your gut is very often wrong. It's either very, very wrong or very, very right. So it's very hard to know. And I think for a lot of post-traumatic parents, you feel so damaged by your damage. How can I possibly then be a good parent? It's such a common thought. It's like that mom who was molested who's saying to me, I can't have the sex talk with my kid because this whole topic makes me incredibly uncomfortable. Right? She's feeling damaged by her damage. But that's just the starting point. Ultimately, not only was she able to have these conversations with her kids, actually she had experiences where her kids were the ones who noticed unsafe, confusing adult behavior and reported it
Oh my God. Wow.
because they were so used to having these conversations with their mother that when somebody acted, and it wasn't anything like so terrible, but a teacher acted somewhat confusingly, and they were like the first ones to be like, Mommy, this felt confusing. And like, right? Like they noticed it because she became the best person to talk to her kids about it.
That's amazing. That is really a great way to end because we could talk all night, but I really appreciate you doing this with me. Finally. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm so sorry that it was so hard to schedule with me.
No, it was worth waiting for. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate what you're doing with your podcast because I think that the more educated we are as parents, as professionals, the better job we do. Like we want to keep thinking about
Absolutely.
this stuff because you're right. Experts talking sounds very like pat, easy answers, but the messiness of real life decisions, right, is much, much harder. And I think that the more you hear about the messiness of real life decisions when you're like thinking deeply about your parenting, better a job you do.
And to know that there's definitely hope out there and help out there, and you're doing an amazing job with what you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Kids Matter. Raising healthy, happy children takes a village, and I'm grateful you're part of ours. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with another parent, grandparent, teacher, or anyone who cares about kids. Together, we can build the supportive community our children deserve. I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future topics at kidsmatterpodcast@gmail.com with no exclamation point. Your voice truly matters. Until next time, keep advocating for the children in your life because kids really do matter. They are our future. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin, and this has been Kids Matter. Please note that while I am a pediatrician, I am not your child's pediatrician. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. For any medical concerns or decisions, please reach out to your child's healthcare professional.